My name is Amber Walker, and at 32 I thought I knew what family meant. I believed in sacrifice and unconditional love even when my sister Jenna made my childhood a living nightmare. But nothing prepared me for that sterile hospital room, my medical records torn to shreds across the floor, my mother Diana screaming that I was killing my sister while my father Robert called me their biggest mistake. They demanded half my liver, but what the doctor discovered next changed everything I thought I knew about blood and belonging. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if family drama keeps you up at night like it did me. Growing up in our suburban home in Michigan, I learned early that being the older sister meant one thing. I was expected to be the responsible one. From the time I was 4 and Jenna was born, the dynamic was set in stone. My parents, Diana and Robert Walker, made it abundantly clear that Jenna was special. She needed more attention, more patience, more everything. I was just expected to understand. Amber, let your sister have that toy, became the soundtrack of my childhood. It never mattered that it was my birthday present, or that Jenna had already broken 3 of my things that week. The pattern was always the same: Jenna wanted, Jenna got. By first grade, I was packing my own lunches while Mom made Jenna's sandwich with the crust perfectly cut off. When I asked for the same, my mother sighed as if I'd requested she move mountains. You're older, Amber. You need to be more independent. Jenna is still little. But it wasn't just the preferential treatment that made my childhood difficult. It was Jenna's deliberate cruelty that truly left scars. When I was 8, I spent weeks working on a science project about butterflies. I had collected specimens, taken photographs, and created a beautiful display. The night before it was due, I came home from swim practice to find my project destroyed. Colorful paper wings were scattered across my bedroom floor, the display board snapped in half. Jenna stood in the doorway, a smug smile on her face. "Oops," she said with fake innocence. When I ran to my parents crying, my father simply shook his head. "You shouldn't have left it where she could reach it, Amber. You know how curious she is." That was the first time I realized no one was going to protect me from Jenna. By middle school, her tactics evolved. She began targeting my friendships. When I brought Sarah, my best friend, home for a sleepover, Jenna waited until I went to the bathroom and told Sarah I had called her fat behind her back. The next day at school, Sarah wouldn't speak to me. It took weeks to clear up the misunderstanding, only for Jenna to create a new one with another friend. My mother called it sister rivalry. My father said it would toughen me up. Neither of them ever stopped her. I found refuge in books and schoolwork. If I couldn't have protection or peace at home, I could at least excel academically. My straight A's and academic awards were met with moderate approval from my parents, though nothing compared to the celebration when Jenna managed to get a B- on anything. High school brought new dimensions to Jenna's behavior. While I focused on AP classes and college applications, she discovered parties, alcohol, and a concerning talent for manipulation. At 15, she was coming home drunk, screaming at our parents 1 minute and crying for forgiveness the next. They were always more concerned with getting her help than punishing her. When she wrecked my father's car at 16, they bought her a new one. When she failed 3 classes her junior year, they hired expensive tutors. When she was caught with pills at a party, they sent her to a luxury rehab facility for a month. Through it all, I remained the good daughter, the one who never caused trouble, the one they could rely on not to disrupt their lives with chaos, the one they could forget about. The day my acceptance letter from Northwestern arrived was the day I finally saw a path to freedom. My parents were proud but distracted. Jenna had been suspended again. I packed for college with a sense of giddy relief. 4 states away seemed like the perfect distance. Those 4 years were transformative. I made real friends who valued me. I excelled in my graphic design program. I learned what it felt like to be appreciated, to speak, without being interrupted, to exist, without walking on eggshells. When I graduated with honors, my parents attended the ceremony, but left early because Jenna called with some crisis. I moved to Chicago permanently after graduation, landing a job at a respected design firm. I limited my visits home to major holidays, each one reinforcing my decision to keep my distance. I created boundaries: no lending money to Jenna, no being the mediator in family conflicts, no accepting guilt trips about my absence. At 28, I met Ethan Turner at a coffee shop. Our relationship developed slowly, thoughtfully. He was the first person who truly listened when I talked about my family. "That's not normal, Amber," he said, after I casually mentioned how Jenna had once pushed me down the stairs and my parents had called it an accident. "That's abuse." It took months of gentle conversations with Ethan, and eventually therapy sessions with Dr. Kaminsky for me to recognize the dysfunction of my family. "You were parentified and scapegoated, Doctor," Kaminsky explained during one session. "Your sister was the golden child who could do no wrong while you were expected to be perfect without recognition." The vocabulary gave shape to my experiences, but the pain remained. Holiday gatherings continued to follow the same script. Jenna would create drama, my parents would focus entirely on her, and I would drive back to Chicago feeling like a ghost in my own family. I built my own life piece by piece. My career flourished as I was promoted to senior designer. Ethan and I moved in together, adopting a rescue dog named Max. I cultivated friendships with people who respected my boundaries. For the first time, I felt safe, valued, and free. I was 32 years old, and I thought I had finally escaped the toxic patterns of my childhood. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday morning in October. I was at my desk finalizing designs for a major client presentation when my phone lit up with my mother's name. I almost sent it to voicemail. Our last conversation had been tense after she suggested I was selfish for not coming home more often. Something made me answer. "Amber?" My mother's voice cracked. "It's Jenna. She's in the hospital." My stomach dropped. Despite everything, she was still my sister. "What happened?" "Her liver is failing. The doctors say she needs a transplant." My mother's words tumbled out between sobs. "She's been sick for months, but didn't tell anyone. Please come home, Amber. We need you." I closed my eyes, already feeling the familiar pull of family obligation. "I'll be there tonight," I promised, even as a voice in my head whispered that I would regret it. I explained the situation to my boss, Lisa, who immediately told me to take all the time I needed. Ethan helped me pack his concern, evident in the gentle way he folded my clothes. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to do," he reminded me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "No matter what they say." The drive from Chicago to Detroit stretched before me like a journey back in time. Each mile marker brought me closer to the family dynamics I had tried so hard to escape. By the time I reached Beaumont Hospital, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I found my parents in the ICU waiting room. My mother looked older than her 57 years, her face drawn with worry. My father sat rigidly beside her, his expression grim. They both stood when they saw me, my mother pulling me into a desperate hug. "Thank God you're here," she whispered. "Jenna needs you now more than ever." The doctor, a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a serious demeanor, introduced herself as Dr. Patterson. She explained Jenna's condition in clinical terms: cirrhosis, hepatic encephalopathy, portal hypertension. Years of alcohol and drug abuse had finally caught up with her at 28. Without a transplant soon, her prognosis is poor, Dr. Patterson concluded. She's on the national list, but the waiting time can be extensive. My mother's hand tightened around mine. That's why we called you Amber. You could be a direct donor. They can take part of your liver, and it would regenerate in both of you. There it was, the real reason for the urgent call home. Not because they wanted me there for emotional support. Not because they thought I deserved to know about my sister's condition. They wanted my organ. I need time to think about this, I said carefully, pulling my hand away. This is major surgery we're talking about. My father's eyes narrowed. What's there to think about? She's your sister. Robert Dr. Patterson interjected organ donation is a serious decision. Amber should have all the information and time she needs to consider it. She turned to me. We can schedule a private consultation to discuss what liver donation would entail. I nodded gratefully, but I could feel my parents' disappointment radiating like heat. When we were finally allowed to see Jenna, I barely recognized her. Her normally vibrant face was jaundiced, her body thin and fragile against the white hospital sheets. For a moment, I saw the little girl who had once followed me around the house before the cruelty began. Hey, big sister, she whispered, her voice weak. Sorry about all this. For once, she seemed genuinely vulnerable without the manipulation that usually colored our interactions. I sat beside her bed and took her hand. When did you start feeling sick? I asked. Last year, she admitted. But I thought I could handle it. I tried to stop drinking. I really did. Tears filled her eyes. I'm scared, Amber. Despite everything she had done to me, seeing her afraid awakened an instinct to protect that I thought I had buried long ago. The doctors are doing everything they can, I assured her, though the words felt hollow. After visiting hours ended, I retreated to my childhood bedroom, now converted to a home office with a pull-out couch. I called Ethan, desperate for a voice of reason. They want me to be a liver donor, I told him. My voice hushed, though my parents were downstairs. Wow, he exhaled. That's a massive ask, Amber. How do you feel about it? Conflicted, I admitted. Part of me wants to help her, but another part remembers everything she's done. And I'm worried about what happens after. If I do this, and she doesn't change her lifestyle. It's your body, your choice, Ethan said firmly. Don't let them pressure you. After we hung up, I called my best friend Cassie, who had witnessed many of Jenna's cruelties firsthand during our childhood. Be careful, she warned. Your parents have a way of making you feel responsible for Jenna's well-being. This is major surgery, with real risks and a long recovery time. You have the right to say no. That night, I researched liver donation on my laptop. The surgery would require a significant recovery period, 6 to 8 weeks, before returning to normal activities, and up to 6 months before feeling completely recovered. There were risks: bleeding, infection, bioleakage, and the small but real possibility of death. Even with a successful surgery, up to 40% of donors experienced complications. Moreover, there was the reality of Jenna's addiction. What guarantee did I have that she would take care of the gift I would be giving her? Would she commit to sobriety, or would my sacrifice be in vain? I fell into a troubled sleep, dreaming of hospitals and scalpels, and my sister's jaundiced face morphing into the smug smile of the child who had destroyed my science project all those years ago. The next morning, I requested a private consultation with Dr. Patterson, determined to get unbiased information before making any decision. Dr. Patterson's office was a small oasis of calm in the chaotic hospital. Family photos on her desk showed 2 smiling children and a golden retriever. She gestured for me to sit in the chair across from her. I want to make sure you understand what liver donation would involve, she began, her tone professional but kind. This is major surgery with significant recovery time. Most donors need 6 to 8 weeks before returning to work, and full recovery can take up to 6 months. She outlined the procedure in detail: the incision, the removal of approximately 60% of my liver, the weeks of fatigue and restricted activity that would follow. The risks were not insignificant: infection, bleeding, bile leakage, blood clots, and in rare cases, death. Your liver would regenerate to nearly full size within 2 months, she explained. But you would need to avoid alcohol completely during recovery and limit physical exertion. I thought about my job, the projects I was responsible for, the clients who depended on me. 6 months of reduced capacity would impact my career significantly. What about long-term effects? I asked. Most donors return to normal health with no lasting issues, she assured me. But it's a major life decision that you shouldn't take lightly. I hesitated before asking my next question. And what if the recipient doesn't maintain sobriety after the transplant? What happens then? Dr. Patterson's expression grew serious. That's a valid concern. Transplant recipients must commit to lifestyle changes, including complete abstinence from alcohol. Your sister would be required to attend addiction counseling and regular checkups. She paused. However, I can't guarantee compliance. Ultimately, how she treats the organ after transplantation is beyond medical control. The honesty was refreshing after years of everyone making excuses for Jenna. Thank you for being straightforward with me, I said. Of course. And Amber, she added, as I stood to leave, this decision must be yours alone. No one can or should force you to donate. If at any point you feel pressured, please let me know. I nodded, grateful for her understanding, but already knowing that the pressure had begun the moment I stepped back into my parents' orbit. I found my mother and father in the hospital cafeteria, huddled over untouched cups of coffee. Their heads snapped up when I approached, eyes filled with expectant hope. I've spoken with Dr. Patterson, I said, sitting across from them. I need time to consider everything. This is major surgery with a long recovery period. My mother's face fell. But you are considering it. Of course she is, my father answered before I could speak. Amber knows what's at stake here. I have a life in Chicago, I reminded them. A job, responsibilities. This would mean putting everything on hold for months. My mother's hands trembled around her coffee cup. And your sister's life isn't more important than your job. Diana, my father warned, placing a hand on her arm. Then to me, we understand you need to think about this, but time isn't on Jenna's side. The doctors say her condition is deteriorating rapidly. I just need a few days, I insisted. This isn't a simple decision. My mother's composure cracked. A few days, Jenna might not have a few days. Her voice rose, drawing attention from nearby tables. How can you be so selfish after everything we've done for you? Diana, not here, my father hissed, glancing around uncomfortably. But my mother was beyond caring about appearances. What kind of person hesitates to save their own sister? I raised you better than this, Amber Walker. The familiar guilt and shame washed over me, threatening to drown my resolve. I stood abruptly, needing to escape. I'm going to get some air. I spent an hour walking the hospital grounds, trying to clear my head. When I returned to Jenna's room, my parents had already told her about my hesitation. The betrayed look in her eyes cut deeper than I expected. So, you're not sure if I'm worth saving? She asked weakly. That's not fair, Jenna. This is a huge decision that affects my life too. She turned her face away. Just go back to your perfect life in Chicago. I'll be fine. The manipulation was so familiar, it almost made me laugh. Almost. I drove back to my apartment that evening, needing space to think clearly. When I arrived, I found my parents' car in the driveway. They had beaten me there. They sat in my living room looking strangely out of place among the modern furniture and art pieces I had carefully selected. My mother had been crying. My father looked grimmer than ever. "How did you get in?" I asked, though I already knew. I had never asked for the spare key back after college. "We need to talk about this donation situation," my father said, ignoring my question. "Your mother is beside herself with worry." "I told you I need time to think," I repeated, setting down my purse. "While you're thinking your sister is dying," my mother said, "do you understand that every day you delay makes it less likely she'll survive?" "I understand the situation," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "But this is my body, my health at risk. I need to make this decision carefully. After everything we sacrificed for you," my mother continued as if I hadn't spoken. "The dance lessons, the expensive college, the braces. We gave you everything, Amber. Everything. And now, when we need you, when Jenna needs you, you're hesitating." "Those weren't sacrifices, Mom. Those were basic parental responsibilities." The words slipped out before I could stop them. My father stood looming over me. "Your mother and I worked hard to give you opportunities. We expect some gratitude in return." "Gratitude doesn't mean giving up half my liver on demand," I snapped. My mother burst into fresh tears. "How did we raise such a heartless daughter? Your sister would do it for you in a heartbeat." The claim was so absurd I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Would she? The same sister who pushed me down the stairs, who destroyed my things, who made my childhood a living hell, while you both looked the other way. That was normal sibling rivalry, my father dismissed. "You're being dramatic." After they finally left extracting no promises from me, despite their best efforts, I collapsed onto my couch. My phone buzzed with a text from Jenna. "Thanks for proving you never really loved me. Guess I'll just die then." The panic attack hit without warning. My chest tightened, my breathing became shallow, and the room seemed to spin around me. I called Cassie, who came over immediately and stayed the night talking me through breathing exercises and reminding me that I had the right to make my own choices. The next morning, I decided to take a step back. I called the hospital to check on Jenna's condition, but told my parents I needed 3 days without contact to think. They reluctantly agreed, though my mother's parting comment, "I hope you can live with yourself if something happens to her," echoed in my mind. I hadn't expected them to honor my request for space. The next day, they showed up at my design firm. Lisa, my boss, called me into the reception area, her expression concerned. "Your parents are here," she whispered. "They seem upset." They had created a scene in the lobby, my mother tearfully telling anyone who would listen about her dying daughter and her other daughter who refused to help. My father stood stoically beside her, offering apologetic smiles to uncomfortable onlookers. I pulled them into a conference room, mortified and furious. "You can't come to my workplace like this." "We wouldn't have to if you answered our calls," my father countered. "I asked for 3 days. It hasn't even been 24 hours. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "The doctor says Jenna has taken a turn for the worse. Her ammonia levels are rising." The familiar guilt crept back in. What if she really was getting worse? What if these were her final days? Lisa knocked gently on the door before entering. "Amber, is everything okay?" I forced a smile. "Yes, just a family matter. I'm sorry about the disruption." She glanced between me and my parents. "Take the rest of the week off, with pay. Family comes first." Her expression told me she had overheard enough to understand the situation wasn't simple. "Thank you," I said, grateful for her understanding but dreading more uninterrupted time with my parents. As soon as Lisa left, my mother leaned forward. See, even your boss thinks you should be with family right now, at the hospital, getting tested. The pressure was becoming unbearable. Everywhere I turned, there was no escape. The week that followed was psychological warfare. My parents took turns calling and texting, each message more desperate than the last. They enlisted family friends to reach out, each conversation beginning with concern for Jenna and inevitably shifting to how I could save her. My Aunt Carol, who had always been kind to me, called in tears. I know it's a big decision, Amber, but she's so young, too young to die like this. My father's colleague from church, Mr. Dawson, sent an email reminding me of the biblical importance of sacrifice for family. My mother's best friend showed up at my apartment with homemade cookies and guilt wrapped in concern. Your mother hasn't slept in days, she told me. She's falling apart watching Jenna suffer. I tried to maintain my boundaries, to carve out mental space, to truly consider my options. I consulted with my therapist, Dr. Kaminsky, who reinforced that the decision must be mine alone, free from coercion. Ethan stood by me, offering support without pushing me one way or another. Cassie remained my fierce defender, reminding me of all the times Jenna had hurt me without consequence. But the pressure was constant, eroding my resolve like water against stone. On Thursday, I returned to the hospital to check on Jenna's condition. I had just spoken with Dr. Patterson when my mother found me in the hallway, waving a folder of papers. I found these, she said, her voice shaking with anger. She pulled out my medical records papers I had requested from my primary care physician, documenting an old liver condition that might disqualify me as a donor. I had been researching all possibilities, including legitimate medical reasons to decline. You were going to use this to get out of helping your sister. She ripped the papers into pieces, letting them scatter across the polished hospital floor. You're letting your sister die because of some minor issue from years ago. Mom, those are my private medical records. How did you even get those? Your doctor's office called to confirm your request. I picked up your phone while you were in the shower yesterday. Her eyes blazed with righteous fury. I raised you better than this, Amber. I raised you to put family first. My father appeared behind her, his expression cold. You've always been selfish, but this takes it to a new level. The biggest mistake we ever made was treating you like you were special. All those years of advantages, and this is how you repay us. Something inside me broke. Years of accumulated pain, resentment, and suppressed anger bubbled to the surface. Advantages. You mean the basic care you were obligated to provide as parents, while you let Jenna torment me, while you dismissed every hurt she caused as sibling rivalry, while you made me feel invisible unless you needed something from me. My voice echoed in the hospital hallway. A nurse glanced our way, concerned. My mother stepped closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. If you don't get tested today, don't bother coming home again. You're no daughter of mine. My father nodded in agreement. Family means sacrifice, Amber. If you can't understand that you're not part of this family. The ultimatum hung in the air between us. Everything I had feared and fought against for years was coming true. I was being forced to choose between my autonomy and my family's acceptance, limited and conditional as it was. I found myself in front of the transplant coordinator's office, agreeing to preliminary testing. The woman smiled warmly, explaining the process as if I were making this choice freely. Blood draws, imaging studies, psychological evaluation. All standard procedure to determine if I was a suitable donor. The blood work was done that same day. The ultrasound of my liver was scheduled for the following morning, and the mandatory psychological evaluation was set for the afternoon. Dr. Klein, the transplant psychologist, was a perceptive woman in her 50s. She asked about my relationship with Jenna, my understanding of the risks, and most importantly, whether I was being pressured to donate. In that moment, I made a decision. I would tell the truth. Yes, I admitted. My parents have made it clear that if I don't donate, I'm no longer part of the family. They've shown up at my workplace, accessed my private medical records, and told me I'm selfish for even hesitating. Dr. Klein's expression remained neutral, but she wrote extensive notes. Amber coercion is grounds for automatic disqualification. Organ donation must be completely voluntary. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Someone in a position of authority was acknowledging the wrongness of the situation. I'm going to recommend that you not proceed as a donor at this time, she said gently. This doesn't mean you can never donate if you change your mind, but it's clear you're under extreme pressure right now. Relief washed over me, followed immediately by anxiety about my parents' reaction. But at least the decision had been taken out of my hands. That relief was short-lived. Somehow, I never discovered exactly how my parents learned of the failed psychological evaluation within hours. My mother found me in the hospital cafeteria, her face flushed with anger. You deliberately failed the psych eval, she accused loud enough for nearby patients and visitors to hear. You told them we were forcing you. How could you lie like that? It wasn't a lie, Mom. My father appeared beside her, his expression thunderous. After everything, you're still letting your sister die. Do you hate her that much? I don't hate Jenna, I protested, aware of the stares we were attracting. This isn't about her. It's about my right to choose what happens to my body. My mother collapsed into a nearby chair, sobbing uncontrollably. My baby is dying. And you're talking about your rights. What kind of monster have you become? A security guard approached, drawn by the commotion. Is everything all right here? My father stepped toward him menacingly. No, everything is not all right. My younger daughter is dying while my older daughter refuses to help her. The guard looked uncomfortable. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. This is a hospital. I'll lower my voice when my daughter agrees to save her sister's life, my father shot back. The situation was spiraling out of control. Heads were turning throughout the cafeteria. My mother's sobs grew louder. My father and the security guard were in a tense standoff. Fine, I said the word, barely audible, even to myself. Then louder. Fine, I'll do it. I'll ask for another psychological evaluation. My mother's sobs immediately quieted. My father's posture relaxed. The security guard looked relieved to avoid an incident. You're doing the right thing, Amber, my father said, his tone instantly shifting to approval. I knew you would make the right choice in the end. The next day I sat through a second psychological evaluation with a different doctor. This time, I said all the right things. Yes, I understood the risks. No, no one was pressuring me. Yes, I was making this choice freely and voluntarily. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Dr. Patterson pulled me aside after the evaluation was approved. Amber, are you sure about this? Yesterday you seemed hesitant, and today she left the sentence hanging. I'm sure I lied, unable to meet her eyes. She sighed. All right. We'll schedule the final compatibility testing for tomorrow morning. If everything looks good, we can move forward with the transplant next week. I nodded mechanically, already feeling like a passenger in my own life, watching helplessly as decisions were made about my body without my true consent. That night alone in my childhood bedroom, I cried silently into my pillow. I had never felt more trapped or more alone. The morning of the final testing arrived with a sense of grim inevitability. I had barely slept, my dreams filled with surgical instruments and disembodied voices telling me I had no choice. I dressed mechanically and drove myself to the hospital, my parents having gone ahead to be with Jenna. The transplant coordinator greeted me with a clipboard of forms to sign. Insurance information, acknowledgement of risks, consent for the procedure. My hand moved across the paper as if it belonged to someone else. "We'll need to do one more blood draw for final cross-matching," she explained, leading me to a treatment room. "Dr. Patterson wants to verify tissue compatibility before we proceed." A phlebotomist with gentle hands drew several vials of blood. "You're doing a wonderful thing," she said kindly as she labeled the tubes. "Your sister is very lucky." I managed a weak smile but said nothing. What was there to say? That this wonderful thing felt like the culmination of a lifetime of having my boundaries violated. That the word lucky seemed like a cruel joke when applied to the relationship between Jenna and me. "The lab will rush these results," the phlebotomist continued, oblivious to my inner turmoil. "Dr. Patterson should have them in a few hours." I waited in the family consultation room, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. Ethan had texted asking how I was holding up. I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could I say? That I had surrendered? That all my talk of boundaries and autonomy had crumbled under the weight of family obligation? 3 hours later, Dr. Patterson entered the room, her expression unreadable. She carried a folder of papers and closed the door firmly behind her. "Amber," she said, taking the seat across from me, "we have the results of your compatibility testing." I nodded, bracing myself for discussion of surgery dates and preoperative procedures. "There's something unexpected in the findings." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "You are not a genetic match." The 6 words hung in the air between us. I blinked, certain I had misheard. "What do you mean?" "The preliminary testing suggested I was compatible." "Blood type compatibility, yes, but the detailed genetic testing we do before transplant revealed something else." She opened the folder. "You and Jenna do not share enough genetic markers to be biological siblings." The room seemed to tilt around me. "That's impossible. We're sisters." "The science is quite clear," Dr. Patterson said gently. "The DNA analysis shows you are not biologically related to Jenna." My mind raced through possibilities. A lab error, a sample mix-up. Could there be a mistake? "We ran the analysis twice, to be certain." She hesitated. "Amber, I think we need to speak with your parents." The next 30 minutes passed in a blur. A nurse was sent to find my parents. Dr. Patterson asked if I wanted a hospital social worker present. I declined, still trying to process the implications of what she had told me. When my parents entered the consultation room, their expressions shifted from hopeful to concerned as they registered Dr. Patterson's serious demeanor. "What's happening?" my mother asked, looking between us. "Is Amber cleared for donation?" Dr. Patterson gestured for them to sit. "Mr. and Mrs. Walker, our final compatibility testing has revealed something unexpected. Amber and Jenna are not genetically related." My mother's face drained of color. My father stiffened beside her. "That's ridiculous," he said dismissively. "Of course they're related. They're sisters." "The genetic analysis is conclusive," Dr. Patterson replied, her tone professional but firm. "They do not share enough genetic markers to be biological siblings." "There must be a mistake," my father insisted. "Run the tests again." "We already did," Dr. Patterson said. "Twice." My mother made a small, choked sound. I turned to her, really seeing her for the first time since entering the room. She wasn't surprised. She was terrified. "Mom," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "did you know about this?" She collapsed into the chair, her body folding in on itself. It was answer enough. My father's face flushed with anger. This is absurd. These tests are wrong. My daughters are sisters, end of story. But his protestation lacked conviction. He wouldn't look at me, or at my mother. Dad, I pressed. Did you know? He ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. This isn't the time or place for this discussion. Dr. Patterson cleared her throat. I'll give you some privacy, but I should note that this means Amber cannot be a donor for Jenna. We'll need to focus on the national transplant list or explore other potential living donors. After she left, the silence in the room was deafening. I stared at my parents, these people who had raised me, who had shaped my understanding of family and obligation, who now sat before me as strangers. One of you needs to explain? I said, surprised by the steadiness of my voice. Now. My mother raised her tear-stained face. You were adopted, she whispered. As a baby. We were going to tell you, but then we just never found the right time. 32 years, and they had never found the right time to tell me who I really was. So I'm not your daughter. The question contained multitudes, hurt, anger, confusion, and somehow beneath it all a strange sense of relief. Of course you're our daughter, my mother exclaimed. Just not biologically. My father finally spoke, his voice gruff. We raised you. We fed you, clothed you, educated you. You are our daughter in every way that matters. Except they hadn't treated me like a daughter in the ways that truly mattered. They hadn't protected me, hadn't validated my feelings, hadn't put my needs on equal footing with Jenna's. I need to go, I said, abruptly standing. The walls of the small room were closing in. Amber, wait, my mother began. But I was already moving toward the door, desperate for air, for space, for distance from these people who had lied to me my entire life. In the hospital parking lot, I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, and screamed until my throat was raw. 32 years of identity, of family history, of genetic inheritance, all a fiction. The revelation rewrote not just my past, but my understanding of myself. I wasn't Jenna's sister. I wasn't a walker. Who was I? My phone buzzed repeatedly with calls and texts from my parents, but I ignored them all. Instead, I called the one person who had consistently been honest with me. Ethan, I said, when he answered, my voice breaking. Can you meet me at home? Something's happened. I'm on my way, he promised, no questions asked. I drove home in a daze, the world around me, seeming strangely bright and unfamiliar, as if I were seeing it through new eyes, in a way I supposed I was. For 7 days, I disappeared from my parents' lives. I turned off my phone, took additional time off work, and retreated into the safety of my apartment. Ethan stayed with me, managing the practical aspects of life, while I processed the seismic shift in my identity. Cassie arrived the day after the revelation, armed with comfort food and fierce loyalty. Those lying bastards, she fumed as she unpacked containers of homemade soup and freshly baked bread. 32 years, and they never told you. I keep thinking about all the times they compared me to relatives, I said, curled on the couch, with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. How I have my grandmother's eyes, or my father's stubborn streak. It was all lies. Not necessarily, Ethan pointed out gently. Family traits aren't just genetic. You could have picked up your dad's stubbornness from being raised by him. But the distinction offered little comfort. My entire sense of self had been built on a foundation that was now revealed to be false. I don't even know my medical history, I realized aloud one evening. What if there's cancer in my biological family? Heart disease? What else haven't they told me? The questions multiplied with each passing day. Was I from a closed or open adoption? Did my biological parents know where I was? Had they wanted me? Why had I been given up? By the end of the week, questions had hardened into resolve. I needed answers, and there was only one source. On Sunday morning, I drove to my parents' house unannounced. Their car was in the driveway. They would be home from church by now. My hand trembled slightly as I rang the doorbell of the house I had grown up in, but now felt like a stranger's home. My mother opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise and relief. "Amber, we've been so worried. You haven't answered any of our calls or texts." "I need answers," I said, stepping past her into the foyer. "About my adoption. About why you never told me. About everything." My father appeared from the living room, newspaper in hand. "Amber," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "You're here." "Not for long," I replied. "Just long enough to get the truth." We sat in the formal living room, the one reserved for guests and special occasions. Fitting, since I now felt like an outsider in this family. "Start from the beginning," I instructed. "All of it." My mother twisted her hands in her lap. "We had been trying to have a baby for 5 years," she began. "Fertility treatments, specialists, everything. Nothing worked. We were devastated. Our pastor connected us with a young woman in the congregation," my father continued. 17, unmarried, from a very religious family. She wanted her baby to have a stable home with 2 parents. "You," my mother said, softly. "She was carrying you." "Was it a closed adoption?" I asked. They exchanged glances. "Yes," my father answered. "That was the agreement. She would move away after the birth, start fresh somewhere else. We would raise you as our own." "And never tell me the truth," I added bitterly. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "We always meant to tell you when you were old enough to understand. But then when you were 4, I finally got pregnant with Jenna. It seemed like a miracle. After all those years of trying, we were afraid. Afraid of what I demanded. That you would feel different. Less loved. Less ours." She wiped away a tear. "So we decided to wait until you were older." "And then years passed," my father said. "The right moment never seemed to come. The longer we waited, the harder it became to imagine having that conversation. So you just lied to me my entire life." The enormity of their deception was still difficult to comprehend. Do you have any idea what it's like to suddenly discover at 32 that your entire identity is based on a lie? That you don't know who you really are? "You know exactly who you are," my father insisted. "You're Amber Walker, our daughter." "Am I? Because it doesn't feel like I've ever been treated like your daughter. Not the way Jenna was." "That's not fair," my mother protested weakly. "Isn't it? You let her abuse me for years. You dismissed my feelings, my pain. You consistently put her needs above mine. Was it because she was your real daughter and I wasn't?" The question hung in the air between us. My mother looked stricken. My father's jaw clenched. "We never thought of you that way," my mother finally said. "Never." But her protest rang hollow against the evidence of my childhood. The preferential treatment, the different standards, the emotional neglect. "What about my birth mother?" I asked. "Do you have any information about her? A name? Anything?" Another exchange of glances. "Her name was Catherine Mercer," my mother admitted. "She was from Grand Rapids originally." Catherine. I repeated the name, feeling strange and significant on my tongue. Did she ever try to contact me? My father shifted uncomfortably. "There may have been a letter or two early on. We didn't respond. The adoption was closed, and we were advised to maintain those boundaries." Anger flared hot and bright within me. You kept her letters from me. That wasn't your decision to make. We were trying to protect you, my mother insisted, to give you stability. By lying to me, by denying me knowledge of my origins. That's not protection, that's control. I stood unable to sit still with the emotions coursing through me. I need those letters. And any other information you have about my adoption and my birth family. Amber, please try to understand, my father began. No, I cut him off. I've spent my entire life trying to understand, trying to figure out why I never quite fit in this family, why my sister could do no wrong while I could do no right. Now, it all makes sense. My mother sobbed openly now. We love you, Amber. We've always loved you. If that's true, then you'll give me every piece of information you have about my birth mother, and you'll respect my need for space while I process all of this. They reluctantly agreed. My father disappeared upstairs and returned with a small box. Inside were the adoption papers, 2 yellowed envelopes, addressed in unfamiliar handwriting, and a faded photograph of a young woman with auburn hair and a sad smile. Catherine, my mother confirmed when I held up the photo. She was 19 when this was taken, just before she moved away after your birth. I carefully placed everything back in the box. What about Jenna? Does she know I'm adopted? No, my father said. We never told her either. One more secret, one more lie in a family built on them. How is she? I asked suddenly, remembering the original crisis that had revealed this truth. They found another donor, my mother said. A match from the National Registry. The surgery is scheduled for next week. Relief washed over me, both for Jenna's sake and because the pressure to donate was finally irrevocably lifted. I left my parents' house with the box of my origins clutched to my chest, feeling both lighter and heavier than when I had arrived. The truth had freed me from obligation, but burdened me with new questions. Over the next month, I embarked on a journey of discovery. I conducted online searches for Catherine Mercer from Grand Rapids. I submitted DNA samples to 3 different ancestry websites. I hired a private investigator who specialized in adoption reunions. The first breakthrough came from the DNA test. A second cousin match led to a third cousin who knew the family history. Catherine had married and had 2 more children. She was now Catherine Dawson, living in Seattle. The private investigator provided an address and phone number. For days I stared at the information, unsure whether to reach out. What if she didn't want to be found? What if she had never told her family about me? Cassie, ever practical, offered simple advice. Write her a letter. That way she has time to process before responding. I spent a week drafting and redrafting that letter, trying to strike the right balance between my desire for connection and respect for her privacy. I explained who I was, how I had discovered my adoption, and that I would understand if she wasn't ready for contact. 2 weeks after mailing it, my phone rang with a Seattle area code. Amber. The voice on the other end was hesitant, warm, with a slight Midwestern accent that time hadn't completely erased. This is Catherine. I got your letter. We spoke for 3 hours that first call. She had been searching for me for years, she told me. After sending those initial letters that my parents had hidden, she had respected the closed adoption agreement. But she had never stopped wondering about me. Never stopped hoping I was happy and loved. I was so young when I had you, she explained. My parents were strict religious. They arranged the adoption through our church. I wanted to keep you, but I had no way to support us. She had 2 children now, my half-siblings, a brother Michael, who was 25, and a sister Elise, who was 22. Her husband Thomas knew all about me and had supported her search over the years. "Would you consider meeting sometime?" she asked tentatively. "We could start with just the two of us if that would be more comfortable." The hospital called the same day with news that Jenna's transplant had been successful. The donor liver was functioning well, and her prognosis was good. Despite everything, I felt genuine relief. My parents continued to call and text, their messages alternating between apologies and pleas for understanding. I responded briefly, letting them know I was safe but needed time. The truth was, I didn't know if our relationship could ever be repaired. The foundation of trust had been irrevocably broken. As winter turned to spring, I made plans to fly to Seattle. I had a birth mother to meet, half-siblings to discover, and a new chapter of life to begin. 6 months after the DNA test that shattered my understanding of family, I stood in the arrivals terminal at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, scanning the crowd for a face I had seen only in a faded photograph and video calls. A woman with auburn hair streaked with silver waved hesitantly. "Catherine." We stood facing each other, both searching for resemblances. I saw my own eyes looking back at me, my own smile forming on her face. "Amber," she said, her voice catching, "you're really here." The hug that followed was awkward at first, then fiercely tight. 32 years of separation collapsed in that embrace. Catherine had reserved a private room at a nearby restaurant for our first meeting. Over lunch, she filled in the blanks of my origins, answering questions I had carried for months. "I was studying nursing when I got pregnant," she explained. "Your biological father was my high school boyfriend. When I told him about the pregnancy, he panicked and left town. My parents were devastated, their perfect daughter pregnant out of wedlock." She described the shame and isolation of those months hidden away in her parents' house until the birth. The pastor arranged everything with the Walkers. They seemed like good people, stable, desperate for a child. "I thought you would have a better life with them than with a struggling single mother." "Did you ever regret it?" I asked. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "Every day. But I also wanted what was best for you. It was the hardest decision I've ever made." She had moved to Seattle 2 years after my birth, finished her nursing degree, and eventually met Thomas. They had built a good life together, but she had never forgotten her firstborn. "I tried to find you when you turned 18, she told me, "but the adoption was closed, and your parents never responded to my inquiries." The knowledge that she had been searching, while I remained ignorant of her existence, was both painful and healing. I hadn't been abandoned. I had been sought. The next day, I met my half-siblings. Michael was tall and easygoing, with Catherine's eyes and smile. Elise was artistic and intense, her questions direct but kind. They had grown up knowing they had an older sister somewhere. "Mom kept a photo of you as a baby on her dresser," Elise told me. "She would tell us stories about you, imagining what you might be like." "We always hoped you'd find us someday," Michael added. "Or that we'd find you." Thomas, Catherine's husband, welcomed me with genuine warmth. "Your mother has waited for this day for so long," he said, squeezing my hand. "We all have." Over the next week, I discovered new family connections and unexpected similarities. Catherine and I both loved spicy food and murder mysteries. Michael and I shared a dry sense of humor. Elise and I both had an eye for design. She was studying architecture while I worked in graphic design. "Nature or nurture?" Catherine mused one evening, as we discovered yet another shared trait, an inability to sleep if there was any light in the room. "Both, I think," I replied. "I'm starting to see how much of me comes from you, but I can't deny that the Walkers shaped me too." The mention of my adoptive parents brought a familiar heaviness. Despite the joy of connecting with my birth family, the pain of my childhood and the recent revelations remained unresolved. Catherine sensed my shift in mood. "Have you spoken with them recently?" "Not really. A few texts to let them know I'm okay. They keep apologizing, but I'm not ready to forgive them yet." "Forgiveness isn't an obligation," she said gently. "It's a process, and it happens on your timeline, not theirs." My time in Seattle passed too quickly. Before I knew it, I was hugging my newfound family goodbye at the airport, promising to return soon and to host them in Chicago. "This isn't an ending," Catherine assured me. "It's just the beginning." Back in Chicago, I returned to my apartment, my safe haven, through the turmoil of the past months. Ethan had kept things running smoothly in my absence, watering my plants, collecting my mail, making sure everything was ready for my return. "How was it?" he asked as we sat on the couch that evening. "Overwhelming, wonderful, complicated." I leaned against his shoulder. "They're good people, Ethan. They want me in their lives." "And the Walkers?" he asked carefully. "That's the complicated part." The next day, I returned to work. Lisa welcomed me back warmly, no questions asked about my extended absence beyond whether I was doing okay. My colleagues greeted me with smiles and coffee, and the familiar rhythm of deadlines and creative challenges helped ground me. 2 weeks after my return, I received a letter from Jenna. Not an email or a text, an actual handwritten letter. "Dear Amber," it began. "I'm writing because I don't know if you would answer a call, and I wouldn't blame you. Mom and Dad told me everything about your adoption, about how they pressured you for the transplant, about all of it. I'm shocked and ashamed." She went on to acknowledge the years of mistreatment, admitting that she had been jealous of what she perceived as my perfection. "You were always so capable, so together. I felt like I could never measure up, so I tried to tear you down instead. It was cruel and inexcusable." The transplant, she wrote, had been successful. She was 4 months sober and attending both addiction counseling and therapy. Nearly dying made me reevaluate everything. I'm trying to become someone better, someone worthy of a second chance. She ended with an apology that seemed genuinely remorseful. "I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness or a place in your life. I just wanted you to know that I recognize the harm I caused and I am truly sorry. If you ever want to talk, I'm here. But I understand if you don't." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. I wasn't ready to respond yet, but for the first time, I felt a glimmer of possibility that Jenna and I might someday have a relationship not as biological sisters, but as two people with a shared history trying to move forward. A month later, I agreed to meet my mother Diana for coffee at a neutral location. She arrived early, visibly nervous, clutching her purse like a lifeline. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as I sat across from her. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I replied. "I met Catherine and her family. They're good people." Diana nodded, blinking back tears. "I'm glad. You deserve to know where you come from." She hesitated. "Amber, I know. Sorry isn't enough. What we did hiding your adoption, pressuring you about the transplant, it was wrong. So wrong." "Yes, it was," I agreed, not softening the truth to ease her guilt. "We've started therapy," she told me. "Your father and I separately and together. We're trying to understand how we made such terrible mistakes." It was more accountability than I had expected. That's good. "Is there any chance," she asked hesitantly, "that someday we might rebuild some kind of relationship? I know things can never be the same, but I don't want to lose you entirely." I considered her question seriously. "I don't know, Mom. Trust takes time to rebuild. I need you to respect my boundaries and understand that my relationship with Catherine and her family is important to me." "Of course," she said quickly. "Of course." We parted with a tentative hug and an agreement to take things slowly. My meeting with my father a week later was more stilted, his apology more formal, but I sensed genuine regret beneath his usual reserve. Jenna was the last walker I reconnected with. We met at a park, both of us visibly uncomfortable, but determined to have an honest conversation. "You look good," I said, noting the healthy color in her formerly sallow complexion. "Sobriety agrees with me," she replied with a small smile. 6 months next week." We walked in silence for a while, before she spoke again. "I've been awful to you our entire lives. I don't even know why exactly. Jealousy, insecurity, the way Mom and Dad pitted us against each other without realizing it." She stopped, facing me directly. "None of that excuses what I did. I was cruel, and I'm sorry." "Why should I believe you've changed?" I asked bluntly. "You shouldn't, not based on words alone," she acknowledged. "All I can say is that I'm doing the work. Therapy twice a week. Addiction counseling. Making amends where I can." She shrugged. "Time will tell, I guess." It wasn't a perfect reconciliation, but it was honest. We agreed to occasional text check-ins, with the possibility of more regular contact if things went well. As summer turned to fall, my life settled into a new normal. I spoke with Catherine weekly and was planning another visit to Seattle for Thanksgiving. My relationship with the Walkers remained cautious but was slowly improving. Ethan and I moved in together, talking tentatively about marriage in the future. One evening, as we walked Max along the lakefront, Ethan dropped to one knee. "Amber Walker, will you marry me?" The simple silver ring he offered caught the last rays of sunset. "Yes," I answered without hesitation. Later that night, curled against him in bed, I reflected on the journey of the past year. I never imagined my life could change so completely in such a short time. "For the better?" he asked. "Mostly yes." I thought about it more carefully. The truth was painful, but living without it was worse in ways I didn't even realize. Now I know who I am, all of me, not just the parts someone else decided I should know about. In therapy, I continued to process the complex emotions of the past year. The anger at decades of deception, the joy of discovering my birth family, the lingering hurt of my childhood, and the tentative hope for healthier relationships moving forward. Family is more than blood, Dr. Kaminsky reminded me during one session. It's about love, respect, and honesty. You get to define what family means to you now. And I was defining it day by day. My circle now included Catherine and her family, alongside carefully bounded relationships with the Walkers. It included Ethan and his parents, who had welcomed me warmly. It included Cassie, whose loyalty had never wavered, and friends who had supported me through the darkest days. I had learned that family isn't an obligation. It's a choice. A choice to love, to be honest, to respect boundaries. A choice to value yourself enough to demand the same respect you give to others. A choice to forgive when it serves your healing, and to maintain distance when it doesn't. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't defined by my relationship to anyone else. I was enough, just as I was. As I look back on that hospital room where my medical records lay torn across the floor, I realized that moment of destruction was actually the beginning of something new. When the doctor spoke those 6 words, "You are not a genetic match," she wasn't just delivering medical results. She was opening the door to a truth that would ultimately set me free. Have you ever discovered something about yourself or your family that changed everything you thought you knew? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that family is about how people treat you, not just whose DNA you share. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, your worth is inherent, not dependent on anyone else's validation.